Here are prophets who whisper comfort and prophets who force you to look into the abyss. Ezekiel was that second kind, a priest without a temple, a man torn from his home, chained in an enemy empire, exiled to Babylon, the city that called itself the Gate of God, but was filled with monstrous idols and dark cults. While I was among the exiles by the Kibar River, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. In a field of exile, by a strange river, the heavens opened, not to comfort, but to show him ruins, fire, and judgment. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar II destroyed Jerusalem and deported thousands to Babylon. Babylonian tablets found in Iraq record the names of Jewish exiles and confirm the existence of Hebrew communities in the Kibar region. Babylon was not just a political empire, it was a spiritual monster. Its ziggurats imitated sacred mountains, its priests conjured terrible gods. In Revelation, it is remembered as the great harlot, a symbol of the pride that corrupts entire nations. Ezekiel did not offer easy hope. He described impossible creatures, wheels of fire, burning thrones. He spoke of the glory of God abandoning his temple, an act so unthinkable it was like admitting Israel had lost divine favor. The glory of the Lord departed from over the threshold of the house. What do you do when your God seems to leave? How do you preach hope in a world of ruins? Where does faith go when all that is sacred turns to dust? Today, millions live in exile, refugees of wars, migrants carrying their faith in backpacks. Where is God in the refugee camps? Who dares to prophesy hope when everything seems lost? Get ready to enter his world, the world of Ezekiel, dark, painful, prophetic, the abyss where a voice was born that still speaks to us. This is divine code. Jerusalem was burning, the sacred walls were crumbling, and the temple, the pride of the chosen people, was turning to ashes. Nebuchadnezzar didn't just destroy a city, he dismantled a faith. Deported priests, burned genealogies, profaned what was holy, and broke the identity of a people who believed themselves invincible. The prophet Jeremiah had warned of this disaster. His laments describe the devastated city and the cry of a people without refuge. As Lamentations 1:1 says, "How deserted lies the city when so full of people. She who was great among the nations has become like a widow." The survivors were dragged to Babylon, the demon city, the gate of the gods, a labyrinth of colossal idols, winged demons carved in stone, temples shaped like ziggurats rising like sacred mountains challenging the heavens. The Babylonian priests served gods with terrifying names, conjured dark rituals, and proclaimed the power of a king who believed himself divine. Archaeologists have unearthed administrative tablets listing the names of Jewish exiles as property of the king of Babylon. Ancient reliefs show chained prisoners forced to bring offerings to a god-king seated on his throne. Babylon was not just military conquest, it was spiritual domination. It was about absorbing cultures, erasing memories, imposing new gods. In the Psalms, the people remembered their pain by the rivers of Babylon. Psalm 137:1 says, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion." How do you keep faith in the belly of the monster? How do you believe in a God who allowed his temple to be reduced to dust? Where is hope when all that is sacred becomes ruins and exile? Exile is a living hell. Ezekiel was a priest. His life was meant to serve in the temple of Jerusalem, to offer sacrifices, teach the law, guard the sacred. But he watched everything burn, the walls crumbling, the temple, the pride and center of his faith, reduced to ashes before his eyes. Nebuchadnezzar didn't just destroy a city, he profaned a covenant, broke the identity of his people, and scattered his priestly caste. Ezekiel was among those chained and taken into exile. Not just anywhere, but to Babylon, the so-called Gate of the Gods, a monstrous city full of ziggurat-shaped temples, colossal idols, and reliefs of winged demons watching from the walls. There the king ruled not only as a man, but as a living god, demanding the worship that in Jerusalem was reserved for the Holy One of Israel. The Bible tells us of the people's cry in that exile. Psalm 137, verse 1. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. It was in that landscape of humiliation that Ezekiel was called. Among prisoners weeping over their defeat, he heard the voice of a God who seemed to have abandoned them. Jeremiah, his contemporary, had already warned them from Jerusalem. Lamentations 1:1. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. She who was great among the nations has become like a widow. Ezekiel lived that prophecy as reality. Archaeologists have confirmed this exile, with tablets found in Babylon recording the names of Jewish deportees as property of the king. Ancient reliefs show chained prisoners bringing offerings to a god-king. It was military conquest, yes, but above all, it was an attempt to erase a faith and an identity. How was a priest without a temple supposed to respond? How do you proclaim holiness in a place polluted with enemy gods? How do you speak of hope when even God seemed to have left his house? Ezekiel was trapped in the belly of the monster, but it was there that he began to hear. It was there that he began to see. The priest without a temple, crisis of identity. Ezekiel was a priest. His life was meant to serve in a temple that no longer existed. The place where he was to offer sacrifices, where the glory of God dwelled among the cherubim of the ark, had been razed, turned to ashes before his eyes. Deported to Babylon, he ended up living in Tel Aviv by the Kebar River, a colony of Hebrew exiles in a foreign land. There was no altar there, no sacred incense, only invisible chains, humiliation, and silence. For a priest, it was the end of his vocation. Without a temple, he was a broken man, exiled, humiliated, irrelevant. But it was there, beside foreign waters, on soil consecrated to enemy gods, that the impossible happened. The heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. Ezekiel 1:1. The God who seemed to have abandoned his house spoke in unclean land. The God who had allowed the defeat of his chosen people chose to reveal himself among exiles, not in Jerusalem, but in the heart of the enemy empire. Why would God choose to speak in a place where his name was blasphemed? Why break the silence in a landscape of idols, ziggurats, and kings who proclaimed themselves living gods? Perhaps to show that his glory is not chained to stones or borders, that his voice pierces exile and judgment, that even in the belly of the monster, he remains God. The silence of God, the dark question exile, was not just punishment. It was an open wound in the soul of a people. It was the moment when faith trembled, when the most dangerous question became impossible to avoid. Had Yahweh been defeated by Marduk? How could they accept that the God who brought them out of Egypt allowed his temple to burn like a profaned sacrifice? Lamentations 2:7 screams it as a desperate lament. The Lord has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. The smoke of the temple was not incense, it was a sign of abandonment. The psalms died in dry throats. The priests, heirs of sacred covenants, were left mute with empty hands, unable to invoke his presence. Where was God? That was not just a question asked by exiles kneeling by foreign rivers. It was a challenge that chilled the blood. Had he grown tired? Had he become indifferent? Had he left? And that question is still alive. It is heard in cities ravaged by bombs, at borders that separate families, in hospitals where monitors fall silent with a final beep. in mass graves of silenced genocides. The silence of God is not just an ancient memory. It is an abyss that opens beneath our feet. It forces us to look at it without easy hope, to ask if there is a faith that can endure when even the throne of God seems empty. The man who saw the horror, but Ezekiel was not chosen to offer easy hope. He was not called to comfort or to soothe. He was chosen to see what no one could bear to see, to describe visions that would make an army tremble. He was a man whom God forced to embody his message. He was commanded to eat a scroll written on both sides, full of laments and woes, to consume judgment so he could speak it with his own mouth. Ezekiel 3:1-3 records, "Son of man, eat this scroll and go, speak to the house of Israel." So I ate it, and it was in my mouth as sweet as honey, a sweetness that would soon turn bitter, because the message was condemnation. God took away his voice, so he would speak nothing but his words. Ezekiel was rendered mute for endless days, waiting for the divine command to break the silence. He was forced to lie on one side for over a year, symbolizing the punishment to come. And even more, he was commanded to cut his own hair with a sword, divide it into parts, burn it, scatter it to the wind, and destroy it as a sign of Jerusalem's fate. Fire, dispersion, and death. Prophet or madman, seer or condemned. A chosen man or a man cursed for seeing too much. Ezekiel did not offer pretty words. He did not decorate ruin with comfort. He offered truth, raw, bloody, irrefutable. He was the voice of judgment, the witness to a disaster no one wanted to admit. The universe of foreign gods. In Babylon, the shadows were not empty. Winged demons adorned temples, carved in stone to watch with impossible eyes. Huge winged bulls with human faces guarded the gates, symbols of power and terror. Powerful priests mastered dark rituals. They conjured gods with inhuman names, spoke in forgotten tongues, performed blood offerings to keep ravenous spirits at bay. On their ziggurats, they lifted sacrifices as if the smoke could open a direct channel to the underworld. The king was not just a king. He was a living god. His word was law and divine decree. Babylon was not simply a city. It was a gigantic altar built to human pride, a tower that claimed to touch the heavens and usurp God's throne. Isaiah 47:5-6 calls her the devastator, the one who says in her heart, "I will be mistress forever." Revelation 17:5 remembers her as the great harlot, the mother of the abominations of the earth. But its name, Babylon, carried a perverse riddle. Babilou, the gate of God. But what God, what entity answered the prayers in that city covered in gold and blood? What power accepted the sacrifices and whispered in the dreams of its priests? For a priest of Yahweh, for an exile like Ezekiel, Babylon was not just a place of captivity. It was the heart of a strange cult. It was the belly of a spiritual monster. And it was there, among those impassive idols, that God chose to speak. The impossible role, the watchman of the abyss. God didn't call Ezekiel to comfort. He called him to warn. "I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel," not to whisper easy hopes, but to shout alarm amid the ruins. His mission was impossible, to announce judgment to a people who did not want to listen, to tell them that the disaster was not a diplomatic error, but a deserved punishment. That exile was not the end of God, but the result of their betrayal. Ezekiel 3:18 contains the most brutal warning. "If you do not warn the wicked, I will hold you accountable for his blood." There was no escape. Silence was complicity, indifference, condemnation. Ezekiel became a sentinel in enemy land, a watchman in hell. Surrounded by foreign idols, exiled with a humiliated people, he had to keep his eyes open and his voice ready to pronounce judgment. It was not an honorable role. It was an unbearable destiny, to be hated by his own, rejected as a traitor, ridiculed as insane, all to deliver a message no one wanted to receive. Who wants to be the messenger of catastrophe? Who can bear to be the voice that announces ruin when everyone is begging for comforting lies? Ezekiel was not a prophet who brought easy relief. He was the forced witness to his people's failure, to the moment when the covenant was broken and God seemed to withdraw among flames and dust. He was the priest without a temple, the exile who saw the heart of his nation reduced to ashes. But even there, in the land of the enemy, where winged demons guarded gates and kings called themselves gods, his God spoke, not with caresses, but with visions that shook sanity. He heard judgment proclaimed with fire, saw the glory of God abandon his house with the roar of burning wheels and impossible creatures, felt in his own flesh the command to embody the message, mute until the exact moment, lying on one side for endless days, cutting his hair with a sword and throwing it to the wind as a sign of dispersion. He announced the siege and fall of his beloved city with the precision of an executioner, denounced innocent blood, secret idolatry, the violence that had contaminated even the thresholds of the temple. But his words did not remain trapped in ruin, because he also saw what seemed impossible, a valley covered in bones, bleached by the sun, echoing with the crackle of dead joints coming back together, covering with flesh at the breath of the divine word. He saw proud nations with countless armies kneeling before a power they couldn't comprehend. He saw an impossible sanctuary where God's holiness would no longer be profaned. He saw a people transformed, not by nostalgia or pride, but by a new heart, engraved with laws they could not forget. Ezekiel tears the blindfold from our eyes. He reminds us that judgment is real, that God cannot be domesticated or bought with empty rituals. That fire does not forgive lies. But he also forces us to look beyond the ruins, to ask if there is life after exile, if something pure can still be born from the dust of failure, if there is hope for those who dare to hear what they would rather keep silent. Because this is not just his message, it is a mirror, a challenge, a warning, and a promise. If you want to understand his vision, if you want to hear what he said with his own mouth, if you dare to descend with him into exile to hear the voice that many have tried to forget, join me, subscribe, and follow this journey, because we are not going to seek easy comfort. We are going to seek the truth, and the truth, like fire, can destroy before it illuminates.